Have you ever noticed how people who start questioning the most fundamental structures of their lives often become strangers within their own families? There is something deeply unsettling about seeing someone close to you to awaken to realities. The rest of the group prefers to keep asleep. It's as if in a dark room where everyone has tacitly agreed not to mention the darkness, someone suddenly lights a match. That small flame not only illuminates the space, but exposes all the shadows, every corner we'd rather not see. And the instinctive reaction of those who are comfortable in the darkness is rarely gratitude. On the contrary, it's often hostility, as if the one who brought the light had violated some unspoken social contract to keep the collective illusions intact. This phenomenon isn't new in human history, but it takes on particular forms in our age of accelerated transformation, especially when it unfolds within the family unit and involves men awakening to deeper levels of existential, political, or spiritual consciousness. To understand this, we need to take a few steps back and look at how family structures have evolved throughout human history. For most of our existence as a species, the family wasn't just a unit of kinship, but one of economic survival and physical protection. In hunter-gatherer societies, agrarian civilizations, and even the early stages of the industrial age, the family functioned as a cohesive organism where conformity to group norms wasn't just a matter of social comfort, but literally of life and death. A member who strayed too far from established values or behaviors wasn't just an inconvenience, but a potential danger to collective survival. Imagine a man in a small medieval village who begins to question the authority of the church or the traditions of farming. He wouldn't only be causing ideological discomfort, he'd be threatening the family's access to vital resources and community protection. As we move into the modern era, those immediate survival pressures have lessened, but the deep psychological structures that govern family dynamics have remained surprisingly unchanged. The modern family still operates to a great extent as a system of shared beliefs, an ecosystem of mutually validated narratives that provide comfort and meaning. When one member, especially a man, traditionally associated with stability and continuity, starts to question those foundational narratives, he isn't merely expressing a divergent opinion. He is effectively destabilizing the very fabric that keeps the family unit cohesive. Here we reach a crucial point for understanding why more conscious men are often rejected by their families. Awakening rarely happens in a partial or compartmentalized way. When a man starts questioning, for example, the economic structures that governed his professional life, that questioning often expands into other areas. He may begin to examine the power dynamics in his marriage, his family's consumption habits, the values he's passing to his children, the true motivations behind his religious traditions. In other words, the awakened man doesn't just disagree on specific issues, he begins to operate from an entirely different paradigm, one that renders many of the family's basic assumptions invalid or at least questionable. Imagine a man who has worked 2 decades in a corporation, contributing to products he now recognizes as harmful to the environment or to public health. His awakening isn't simply about changing jobs. It's about confronting the fact that much of his identity social status, and the material privileges he provided his family were built upon something he now sees as fundamentally flawed. How will his wife, who may have built her own identity around the social status his job provided, react to that awakening? How will his children, accustomed to a certain lifestyle, process this transformation? The cognitive dissonance that arises doesn't affect only him, it reverberates throughout the entire family system. It's also important to note that this rejection isn't always the result of malice or conscious pettiness on the part of relatives. It's a form of psychological self-preservation. When one family member begins articulating uncomfortable truths or living according to radically different values, he inadvertently becomes a mirror reflecting back to the others the contradictions and compromises in their own lives. The mother, who spent decades suppressing her personal ambitions to raise her children, may feel deeply threatened when her adult son questions traditional gender roles. The father, who endured an alienating job his whole life to support the family, may feel his sacrifice devalued when his son chooses a simpler life with less material status, but greater alignment with his values. In these cases, the rejection of the more conscious member isn't a denial of his worth as a person, but a desperate attempt to preserve the narratives that give meaning and coherence to the other's life choices. The situation becomes even more complex when we consider the dynamics of masculinity in contemporary societies. Historically, a man's social worth has been tightly tied to his capacity for productive conformity, especially within the context of industrial and post-industrial capitalism. A good man is one who takes his place in the economic machine without asking too many questions, who materially provides for his family, who defends existing values and institutions. Awakening often leads to a re-evaluation of these masculine metrics of worth, which can be perceived not just as a rejection of the broader socio-economic system, but as an abdication of conventional masculine responsibilities. Take, for instance, a man who, after years working in finance, develops a critical awareness of the inequalities perpetuated by the system he served. He decides to drastically reduce his lifestyle, perhaps move to a smaller community, devote himself to activism or socially meaningful work that pays far less. From the perspective of his expanded consciousness, he is finally living with integrity. But to his family, especially if they haven't gone through a similar awakening, he may appear to be abandoning his responsibilities, rejecting the comfort he once provided, and even seeming arrogant in his new ethical stance. The chasm between these perspectives can rarely be bridged through rational dialogue alone, because we're not talking about disagreements over facts, but about fundamentally different paradigms for perceiving and valuing reality. Modern technology has only intensified this dynamic. We live in an era of algorithmic personalization, where each person can effectively create their own informational reality. Two members of the same family may be exposed to radically different sets of information, reinforcing divergent worldviews. The man who begins to research issues like environmental sustainability or economic injustice soon finds himself in an informational environment entirely different from that of his relatives. Over time, this informational divergence translates into a divergence of values, priorities, and even shared language. Family members literally stop understanding each other, not for lack of love or effort, but because they have come to inhabit distinct conceptual realities. There's also an important generational factor at play. Many men who experience profound awakenings of consciousness in midlife are caught between their parents' generation, often more rigid and traditional, and their children's, which tends to be more fluid and skeptical of hierarchy. They may find themselves in a generational no man's land, rejected by the elders for abandoning tradition, and viewed skeptically by the young, who may see their transformation as insufficient or too late. This in-between position can be profoundly lonely, contributing to the sense of alienation even within one's own household. I need to pause and ask you directly, which aspect of this awakening of consciousness resonates most with your own experience? Have you ever felt this kind of distance from those close to you once you began questioning structures you previously accepted without reflection? Many of us keep such experiences to ourselves, perhaps out of fear of seeming pretentious or of deepening the divide. But your reflections are valid and likely shared by more people than you think. Share in the comments, my awakening created distance when I started questioning. Your voice might help create a space where we can honestly discuss these painful personal transformations instead of suppressing them. And perhaps by naming these experiences together, we can begin to imagine ways to integrate our personal growth with our deepest connections. Another complicating factor is what could be called the false awakening effect. Human consciousness doesn't expand linearly or uniformly. The man who genuinely begins to awaken to the limitations and contradictions of his previous paradigm initially passes through a phase that could be described as a kind of enlightened arrogance. In this stage, he may become dogmatic about his new perceptions, impatient with those who don't share his vision, even condescending in his attempts to educate others. This behavior, though understandable as part of transformation, often provokes unnecessary resistance and may be mistaken by relatives for mere rebellion or a midlife crisis. True deepening of consciousness eventually leads to renewed humility, to an understanding that awakening is a continuous process, not a final state of enlightenment that separates the awakened from the asleep. Yet many men never reach this more mature stage, remaining trapped in a partial awakening that is as dogmatic as their previous unconscious state, merely with a different set of absolute beliefs. It's also essential to acknowledge the economic dimension of this phenomenon. The modern family, especially in the middle class, often functions as an interdependent economic unit. The financial and professional choices of one member directly affect the material well-being of the others. When a man undergoes a transformation that leads him to question his traditional economic role, it's not just an abstract philosophical challenge, it's a very concrete threat to the family's established way of life. The wife, who may have made career sacrifices to support her husband's path, can feel particularly vulnerable when he starts questioning the value of conventional success. The children who grew up expecting financial support for education or independence may feel betrayed. Here, The rejection of the more conscious man has roots not only in ideological differences, but in very real material anxieties. Human history offers us countless examples of this pattern. Think of figures like Socrates, Jesus, Gandhi, or countless ordinary people whose names we do not know, but who went through similar transformations. The pattern is surprisingly consistent. The individual who awakens to deeper truths often faces their greatest resistance, not from declared enemies, but from those closest to them, those who would theoretically benefit the most from their expanded awareness. No prophet is accepted in his own land, says the ancient proverb, capturing this timeless dynamic. What is less discussed is how this pattern manifests in the intimate dynamics of the modern family, and specifically how it affects contemporary men who are navigating transformations of consciousness amid the peculiar pressures of our time. Perhaps one of the most painful dynamics in this process is what we might call the mirror effect. When a family member awakens to a deeper understanding of the contradictions and illusions that permeate modern life, they inevitably become a mirror for others, reflecting aspects of reality that we would rather not see. The corporate executive who abandons a lucrative career for ethical reasons becomes an uncomfortable mirror for the brother-in-law who remains in a similar position. The mother who begins to question patterns of consumption and materialism reflects an inconvenient truth to the sister who has based much of her identity on possessions and appearances. In such cases, the hostility directed toward the more conscious family member is rarely about the specific ideas they express, but about the existential discomfort their mere presence evokes in others. At the center of this dynamic lies the primal fear of isolation. Human beings are, above all, social creatures. Our need for belonging is not just a preference, but a deep psychological necessity rooted in our evolution as a species. For hundreds of thousands of years, isolation from the group meant almost certain death. Our brains evolved to fear social exclusion nearly as much as we fear direct physical threats. When a man begins to articulate truths that threaten his belonging within the family group, he is essentially navigating between two forms of suffering: the pain of inauthenticity, living against his expanded conscience, or the pain of distance from those he loves most. It is no wonder that this dilemma often results in a kind of paralysis, where the more conscious man tries to live with one foot in each world, unable to fully integrate his inner truth with his closest relationships. This tension is even more pronounced in societies that value individualism in rhetoric, but punish true individuality in practice. Modern Western culture nominally celebrates authenticity and self-discovery. Yet our social, economic, and family systems often require a high degree of conformity to function without friction. The man who takes seriously the cultural imperative to be true to yourself and follows that directive to its logical conclusions often discovers that his authenticity is welcomed only as long as it remains within certain acceptable boundaries. A midlife crisis that results in a sports car is tolerated as harmless, perhaps even comical. A midlife crisis that leads to a fundamental questioning of capitalist values or traditional family structures is perceived as a far more serious threat. The irony is that often the man undergoing such an awakening is simply trying to live according to the very values what his family nominally supports. The executive who leaves an ethically compromised job to work in something more aligned with his values is often merely trying to honor the lessons about integrity he learned in his upbringing. The father who begins to question unsustainable consumption patterns is often motivated by the desire to ensure a livable world for his children and grandchildren. From this perspective, the family's rejection of the more conscious man reveals one of the central contradictions of contemporary life. We profess certain values in the abstract, yet organize our daily lives according to pressures and incentives that often contradict those values. The man who tries to resolve this contradiction becomes an uncomfortable reminder of the cognitive dissonance others prefer to ignore. There is also a significant gender dimension in this dynamic. In traditional patriarchal societies, the man was supposedly the moral and spiritual authority of the family. With the partial erosion of these structures in modern societies, combined with the persistence of traditional masculine expectations in other areas, the contemporary man often finds himself in a paradoxical position. He is expected to be both the stable material provider and the spiritual moral pioneer of the family, roles that can come into direct conflict when an awakening of consciousness occurs. The woman who undergoes a similar transformation of consciousness may face other forms of resistance, but she is rarely seen as abdicating a central responsibility of her gender role in the same way. Let us now consider the psychological effects of this rejection on the man undergoing the process of expanded consciousness. The resulting isolation can have deeply destabilizing effects. Many men, upon finding themselves distanced from their families as a result of their inner growth, experience periods of intense doubt. They begin to question the validity of their new perceptions, to wonder whether the emotional cost of their authenticity is truly justifiable. Some end up regressing, suppressing their newly discovered truths to preserve family harmony, often with devastating consequences for their long-term mental and spiritual health. Others continue their transformation, accepting the distance as a necessary cost, yet carry with them a deep sadness for not being able to share their inner growth with those they love most. This existential crossroads is not merely a personal or family drama, but a microcosmic reflection of dilemmas we face as a society and as a species. Humanity as a whole is at a moment of potential awakening of consciousness. We are confronting uncomfortable truths about environmental sustainability, economic inequality, the limitations of our political systems, and the unintended consequences of our technologies. But just as the individual who awakens faces resistance within his family, the segments of society that articulate these inconvenient truths face fierce resistance from those invested in maintaining the status quo. The dynamic is fractal, repeating itself at different scales, from the family nucleus to the global community. So how do we navigate this treacherous terrain? How can a man awakening to an expanded consciousness honor his inner truth without unnecessarily alienating those he loves. There are no simple or universal solutions, but some guiding principles emerge from the collective experience of those who have crossed this territory before us. First, it is crucial to recognize that authentic awakening of consciousness includes an expansion not only of intellect, but also of empathy and compassion. The truly conscious man understands that his family is not simply wrong or asleep, but operating from the paradigm they know, facing their own fears and limitations. He recognizes that his own consciousness is an evolving process, not a final state of enlightenment that separates him from the unenlightened. This humility is essential for keeping channels of communication open. Second, timing and pacing matter. Deep transformations of consciousness often occur during moments of crisis or rupture, but their integration into daily life is a gradual process that may take years or even decades. The conscious man learns to discern when to express his most challenging truths and when to focus on common ground still shared with his family. He recognizes that not every moment is equally conducive to transformative conversations, and that trying to force others to keep up with his process can be counterproductive. Third, it is important to find supportive communities outside the family nucleus. Historically, those undergoing significant transformations of consciousness sought others on similar journeys, forming monastic communities, philosophical circles, artistic or political movements. Today, such communities can be found both locally and digitally. These connections provide validation, shared language, and examples of how others have navigated similar territory, reducing the pressure on the family unit to meet all needs for understanding and belonging. Fourth, recognize that integration is often possible, even when it initially seems impossible. With time and patience, families often find new balances that accommodate the expanded consciousness of their members. The man who initially seems radical and disruptive in his family's eyes may eventually be recognized as someone who opened valuable paths for everyone. This integration rarely means returning to the previous state, but rather developing a new, more flexible and inclusive family paradigm. Finally, it is vital to remain open to the possibility that one's own awakening is incomplete or partially mistaken. True expanded consciousness includes the capacity to continually question one's own conclusions, to remain open to the possibility that aspects of the worldview we reject may contain truths we are not yet seeing. The family, precisely because of its resistance to our new perspectives, can serve as a valuable counterpoint, highlighting blind spots in our understanding that we might otherwise overlook. It is also important to consider the impact of broader social structures on this family dynamic. In societies where basic material well-being is precarious and where adequate social safety nets do not exist, the pressure on a man to conform to conventional productive expectations is intensified. The challenge of integrating expanded consciousness with family responsibility is very different for a man living in a society with strong social protection, where basic needs are guaranteed regardless of individual choices, compared to a man in more Darwinian societies, where his family depends entirely on his ability to function within the dominant economic system, regardless of how he ethically evaluates that system. This structural reality reminds us that the family's rejection of the more conscious man is not merely a psychological or spiritual dynamic, but also a socio-economic and political one. The same structures that make it difficult to integrate expanded consciousness into family life also create obstacles to broader social transformation. The executive who cannot leave an ethically problematic job without compromising his family's material well-being is a microcosm of a society that cannot transition to more sustainable practices without temporarily compromising established living standards. Observing human evolution from a broader perspective, we can see this conflict as part of an ongoing evolutionary process. For most of our history as a species, survival primarily depended on group cohesion and conformity to established norms. But as we face increasingly complex existential challenges, our collective survival depends more and more on our ability to consciously transform our systems of values and behaviors. Individuals who awaken to this need for transformation before it becomes cultural consensus inevitably find themselves in a difficult position, perceived simultaneously as visionaries and as threats. Men who experience family rejection because of their expanded awareness may find comfort in recognizing that they are part of a broader evolutionary process, their personal challenges reflecting the collective dilemmas that all humanity will eventually have to face. There is also a spiritual or existential dimension to this process that transcends purely sociological or psychological explanations. Many contemplative traditions suggest that awakening to deeper realities inevitably involves a form of death and rebirth, a partial dissolution of the socially constructed personality, and the emergence of a more authentic identity rooted in transcendent values. Seen through this lens, family rejection can be understood as part of an initiatory process, a test of the individual's sincerity and depth of commitment to his inner truth. The mystical traditions of nearly all cultures contain stories of figures who had to leave their families of origin, literally or figuratively, as part of their spiritual journey, only to eventually return with wisdom that benefited the entire community. Of course, such a perspective, while potentially comforting to the individual facing rejection, does not diminish the real pain of family estrangement or magically resolve the practical dilemmas involved. Human life is lived in the continuous balance between multiple truths and responsibilities, and there is no perfect algorithm to determine when to prioritize personal authenticity over relational harmony, or vice versa. Each man going through such an awakening must navigate this terrain on his own, guided by his individual conscience and the particular circumstances of his life. What seems certain, however, is that we are at a historical moment where this phenomenon is becoming more common and more visible as the systems and institutions that structured modern society show growing signs of tension and unsustainability. More people are questioning fundamental assumptions about how we live and organize our lives. More men are awakening to the limitations of conventional definitions of success and masculine purpose, seeking new ways to integrate personal authenticity with meaningful connection. This process inevitably creates turbulence in family relationships, but it also offers unprecedented possibilities for new forms of connection based on deeper shared truths. Once the initial discomfort of transformation has been navigated, if these reflections have touched something you've been feeling but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you will connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we gather here to explore together the great questions that define our era, and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this ongoing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. For those already on the path of awakening, remember that true expansion of consciousness always includes the deepening of compassion, especially toward those who do not share our particular vision. Family members who resist our transformation are not enemies, but companions on a shared human journey, navigating their own limitations and fears as we all do. The ability to maintain genuine connection through profound differences in perspective may be the truest test of how genuine our awakening is, and perhaps the most valuable contribution we can offer to a world divided by increasingly deep polarizations. Ultimately, perhaps the central paradox is this: the same awakening that initially separates us from our closest circles contains, if followed to its deepest conclusion, the seeds of a more authentic and lasting connection. The truly conscious man eventually transcends both unconscious conformity and reactive rebellion, finding a third path that integrates personal autonomy with relational responsibility. This path is rarely linear or free of setbacks, but for those with the courage to follow it, it offers the possibility of a life that simultaneously honors inner truth and the bonds that connect us to one another, even through the deepest transformations of consciousness and purpose.
When I write a book, I would sometimes try to imagine my reader. And I usually base my imagined reader either on myself or on people I actually know, or on encounters I had with students at university or public events or interviews. But this is a very limited pool of examples of data. When I'm doing it, maybe I have a kind of pool of information on a couple of hundred people. The AI that would write the book or the piece of music, it would have data on millions and billions of human beings over time. If the goal is to create a certain state of mind for other people, I just don't see how we can compete with the AI on that, especially as it will also have the advantage of being able to tailor the book, the song specifically to different people.
of people, if they're watching this video, it was recommended to them by an algorithm.
Algorithms now are extremely powerful. They increasingly control us. I'm now publishing a book. I'm on a book tour. My number one client is not a human being, it's the algorithm. If I can get the algorithm to recommend my book, that's it. My job is done. The humans will follow the algorithm. We need these algorithms, otherwise we can't manage these huge information network without algorithmic help. They should be accountable. If a social media algorithm recommends to people a hate-filled conspiracy theory, this is the fault not of the person who produced the conspiracy theory. It's the fault of the people who designed and let loose the algorithm. There is this huge debate about freedom of speech. I think we should be extremely careful about censoring the free speech of human beings. But they should be held accountable for the decisions of their algorithms. And algorithms don't have freedom of speech. It's the first time in history that there is something which is not a human being that decides which stories to spread and that can create new stories.
Distinguished guests, dear colleagues and students, good evening. My name is Liu Chen, and I am an assistant professor in the School of Arts here at Peking University. It is my great honor to serve as a moderator between two distinguished scholars, Professor Yuval Harari and Professor Cheng-Le Song. Professor Harari, I'm sure most of you are very familiar with his works, but let me introduce him briefly in the very beginning. He is the Distinguished Research Fellow at the University of Cambridge, and his publications have been best-selling ones across the world. We're very happy to have him here today.
It's a pleasure and honor to be here. It's been quite a while since I was last in China. The last time I was here was before the COVID pandemic. And previously I used to come every year. And then it became more difficult. But I'm very happy to be here again with you. I'm a historian in my training, and I see myself as a historian. But I think that history is not just the study of the past. History is also the study of the present and of the future. Historians, our real subject matter is change. We try to understand how things change. And we are now in the midst of maybe the biggest change in human history, perhaps the end of human history and the beginning of a post-human stage of history. And this raises a lot of deep philosophical questions about the very meaning of humanity. So there is really no one better to discuss it with than with a philosopher.
Okay, thank you. We are also very honored to have Professor Cheng-Le Song with us today. Professor Cheng is the head of the Department of Philosophy here at Peking University. His expertise lies in Taoist studies. But trust me, I have known him for more than 20 years. His knowledge spans way beyond ancient texts. So we look forward to his conversations tonight as well. Professor Cheng, would you like to say hello as well?
Okay, hello everyone, and it's a very precious opportunity for me to have a dialogue with Professor Harari. It is not so often happened. You have an opportunity to talk with certain writers, have so many fans and readers. It's a very amazing things. I got to know just a few days ago that his book got millions of readers only in China. It's amazing for me. Now it's a time of a screen. We are immerse ourselves in this kind of short videos and all those messages. That is not so serious. But the Professor Harari composed several books with in-depth understanding and reflection on the infrastructure of human beings' culture and civilizations. And this kind of books get so many readers. And so many readers love this kind of narrative that come from history, but point out towards the future. So I think this is a very interesting thing, and I want to discuss with Professor Harari about this phenomena and what is the exactly significance of the things that have happened around his books, and also about his books, Nexus, which largely lead to a very strong sense of a philosophical reflection of the whole thing. We named as civilizations. You give a very cold description of the things. But let us just start with very simple questions. Just as I mentioned, in nowadays, the professional academic work is somehow becoming increasingly self-enclosed. And we actually keep indifferent about the public issues and the common challenges that are shared by humankind. We just do our things in ancient texts, and we just publish our academic papers to get our salary, and your book just remind us as professional scholars to get back to the public sphere to address the challenges and the problems that shared by the human beings. And this is largely a very interesting thing as a historian. You got so many readers, and you give a so strong structured interpretation of human civilization. This is a very powerful tool to shape the mindset of your reader. And this means that you burdened a very strong ethic responsibility. You shape the mindset of your reader. And if we do believe that you have this power, how we can use this power responsibly? And what is your expectation from all your books, your readers can get from your books? Is a very special attitude? Is a kind of a concern? Or is an expectation of a future? Or something like that? I want to hear about your points about this.
What I try to do in all my works is help people understand themselves, help people understand reality better. And it's a very delicate job because people usually rush to judge reality and to judge history, to judge the past and the present. We want to know who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, whether things are good or bad. And when we rush to judge things, we don't have time to understand them. So in my writing, I try to write history without villains, without good guys and bad guys, but to understand the deep process of change. And I sometimes think about history maybe as a kind of collective therapy for humanity. I go to therapy every week. I have a weekly session. And people can wonder, why do people need to go to therapy? I mean, the subject matter in therapy is myself. Who knows myself better than me? Why do I need to go to some stranger to learn about myself? I mean, this is ridiculous. But it's not. Because yes, I know more about myself than any other person perhaps, but there are so many things I don't want to know about myself. That yet I have access to all the data, to the memories, to the daily events, but I reject. I mean, some things I really like to know about myself, but the more painful, the darker episodes in my life, the more painful things I do in the present, it's very difficult for a person to acknowledge that about oneself. Like if you're in a relationship and there is a problem in a relationship, so you ask, and people would say, I'm perfect. It's the other person who is causing all the problem. If only the other person changed a little, behaved differently, everything would be perfect. And you ask the other person, they would say exactly the same thing. I'm perfect. It's my husband, it's my wife that is causing all the problem in our household. So this is why I need to go to therapy. So to get professional help, to realize some very deep truths about yourself that are too difficult or too painful to acknowledge. And history is like therapy for entire civilizations or for the whole of humankind. Also, entire nations often don't want to acknowledge dark episodes in their past or dark things they are doing right now. Entire civilizations, the same. You ask, and almost every nation, almost every country would say, we are perfect. All the problems are because of the other nations. All the problems are because of the other civilizations, of the other cultures. And I think the responsible job of historians is to, and not to share blame, but to simply help people understand better the big processes and the deep sources of the problems in the world. And this is a big responsibility.
This is very interesting. I just cannot agree more about your points because, you just point out the core value of the humanity. The core value of humanity is not provide any accurate knowledge, not to make the word transparency. Actually, the most important thing is that this. Through the humanity and the reflections, we teach people do not make any judgment in rush, to try to lead a very hesitated life, especially intellectually, because the complexity of human nature, because different kind of narrative that were dominated our man side, that is biased and one-sided. This is largely because what? Because the limitation of our perspective of understanding. And this largely lead to my own understanding of your book. I think that through all your four books, you are largely trying to give a very cautious, refined warning to us as human beings, to urge us to respect, but never blindly trust our imperfect human nature. If we turn to the so-called development of technology and the dramatic change that ongoing because of the AI technology, we'll find that the things is not just the technology itself. Just as Hinton has pointed out, the most important thing is the misuse of this technology, but not the technology itself. This largely leads us to a very important issues in the philosophy of politics, which we called technocracy. And those who dedicate the development of AI technology actually had been set up a systematic techno-tyranny on human beings. Just as me, I have no idea what the AI expert talking about. And I have no idea what I should do to facing up all this change. The only thing is that I was forced to accept it. And this is unfair. Why should I accept it? And the things is this. Those people who manipulate these skills and technologies are ordinary people. They might be evil. They might be trying to set up a dictation on us. And why we should accept it without any condition. We have no right to say no. This is the things that I think that your books try to urge us to reflect the deficiency of human beings. But this deficiency of human beings is the very point that differentiate us from the machine, because we have emotion, we have desire, and all those things largely lead to a very special and very correct attitude towards future. I called it moderately optimistic. You should not too optimistic, but in no way you put it in pessimistic. This is largely the things that in my mind to say your book just as a warning towards us.
I often get this question of whether I'm pessimistic or optimistic about the future. I think it's the most common question that people ask me in interview, in private conversations. And I always say that I'm neither. I mean, pessimists are people who kind of think that no matter what you do, things will go badly. And this undermines human responsibility, because if no matter what we do, things will go badly, what's the point of even trying? Pessimism breeds despair. But optimism can be just as dangerous because it breeds complacency. Optimists tend to say, no matter what happens, things will turn out okay in the end. And then if this is the case, again, we don't need to take responsibility, because whether we act or don't act, whether we think very deeply about what we do, or we just do the first thing that comes up in our mind, things will turn out okay. And I try to find a middle path of being responsible, which is not optimist or pessimist. It's realizing there are different futures possible ahead of us. We can draw a map of different futures, some good, some bad. Nothing is determined. There is no God and there is no law of history that will correct our mistakes if we take the wrong choices. We are not doomed. We have immense power, human beings. We have immense resources, knowledge. We can do the right thing, but there is no guarantee. Enough people need to make good decisions in order to reach the right destination. And, when I look at the world right now, I am appalled by the lack of responsibility, which is shown by many of the political and business leaders around the world. And it seems that humanity is going in a very, very dangerous direction. And at this moment, responsibility is more important than ever because of the AI revolution. We are in the process of creating not just the most powerful technology in history. We are in the process of creating potentially a new species of super intelligent entities, agents, that might very soon take control away from us. We have just a few years to get this thing right. I keep telling people that AI is not like the previous technologies we have invented in history. This time, it's not just about us. Philosophers have this habit that when people invent something, so they always say, it's not about the technology, it's about the humans. They decide what to do with the technology. This was always true, but it's no longer true. We are now creating an independent agent. The defining characteristic of AI is not automation, the ability to act automatically. The defining characteristic is agency. To be an AI, a machine must have the capacity to learn and change by itself, to make decisions by itself, and to invent new ideas by itself. If it can't do that, if it only follows your instructions, if you can predict everything it will do, it is not an AI. And we are rushing to create these super intelligent agents in a very irresponsible way. And as I travel the world and I talk with the leaders of the AI revolution, I ask them two questions again and again, the same way they ask me, are you optimist or pessimist? So I reply with two questions of my own. I ask them first, why are you moving so fast? Why don't give humankind a bit more time to adapt, to reflect, to do things more carefully and safely? And almost all of them reply the same answer. Almost all of them say, we know there are huge risks. They often know it better than anybody else.
the leaders of the AI revolution. We know there are big risks. We would like to move more slowly, but we can't trust our human competitors. If we move more slowly and the other company or the other country doesn't slow down, they will win the AI race, and then they will dominate the world, and the world will be ruled by the most ruthless people. We cannot allow this, so we must move faster. And you then talk with the competitors, they say exactly the same thing. So everybody says we can't trust the other humans. Then I ask them the second question. Do you think you will be able to trust the super intelligent AIs that you're developing? And the same people who just explained to me why they can't trust other humans suddenly say, oh, we think we could trust the super intelligent AIs, which I think is borderline insanity. Because, with humans, we know we have trouble with humans, but we also understand them to some extent. We know quite a lot about human psychology and biology. We have experience in history, not just of violence and war, but also in building trust. 100,000 years ago, humans lived in tiny bands of a few dozen individuals, couldn't trust anybody outside their band. Now we have nations like China with 1.4 billion citizens who cooperate on a daily basis. We have a global trade network connecting even different countries. So we have some achievements in building trust between humans. With AIs, we have no experience. We are just creating them. We already know they can lie and deceive and manipulate. We have no idea what will happen when we release millions of super intelligent AIs to take control of our financial system and military system and culture. So the people who lose trust in other humans, but imagine they can trust an alien super intelligence, this is extremely scary and I think irresponsible.
The things is just like this, because when you are an engineer, you create something, and you will naturally get the confidence to say I can control it. But the things is just like this. When we turn to the AI, it's just a black box. We have no idea what would happen in there, and if there will be certain we call subjectivity within this AI engine, and whether they will have desires, they will have their own intentionality to do certain things, and they have their own value systems. They have their own value preference. All these kind of things were super dangerous. But the things is just like this. When we say that, okay, we just cannot trust other people, means what? Means we know that what is human being, what is human nature. But nowadays, we are still panning for the new definition of what is AI, what is new species. And, this is naturally lead us to a very interesting thing about the difference between silicon-based life and carbon-based life. We seem to have a very clear definition of what is carbon-based life. Even despite of the observable phenomena, which we are living or something like that. But the general definition of carbon-based life is that we will dead. We will dead another days. And these things composed the basic element of the human nature. I said this, the necessity of death and the dependence of group, community, and uncertainty, anxiety about future. All those things lead to us fully understanding of human beings. And the mutual trust among people is the most costly things that we have found in history. And these things lead to a very interesting things is like this. Maybe I could say that through intelligence we can tell us from animal. We know that we are some species with intelligence. But is that case that we can tell us from the AI engine in potential? Because we have emotion. We are deficiency. We have deficiency. We actually have limitations. You know, according to the Chinese philosophy, the most important thing is that we must face up to the real self with emotion, with limitation. We just cannot know everything. And we should be very humble when we face up to others and future. So this is largely Western from the ancient China. And this is largely, you said about responsibility. And the responsibility not just come from a social mechanism, but come from what? Self-understanding of what is yourself, what is the essence of human beings.
And I think a very important point about humans is that we often define ourselves by our intelligence to distinguish us from other animals. We want to feel superior to all the animals, and what can give us superiority? Not the body, not physical strength, so we say, we are more intelligent than all the other animals. So we give, I think, far too much emphasis on intellect and intelligence in the understanding of ourselves, which is now becoming extremely dangerous because soon there will be something more intelligent than us on the planet. So if it's all about intelligence, it's game over for humanity. And maybe I share something from my own personal history, which taught me in, again, a very painful way that intelligence is not the most important thing in humanity or in life. When I was quite a young boy, I was spotted in the school as a gifted student. So they took me out of my school in my neighborhood and sent me to a special school for gifted students where they collected these kind of genius kids from all over the northern part of the country. It was quite far away from my neighborhood, so it was a long ride every day, but this was not the bad thing about it. The really awful thing about it is that this was a special school for gifted students, so everybody saw us as some kind of walking intelligence. And we were valued for our intelligence. And here is where it became really problematic. Back in my neighborhood school, I was easily the best in everything, in mathematics, in reading, in writing, in everything, without much effort, which first left a lot of time to play and do other things. And secondly, kind of my position as the smartest kid in the class was easily secured. And this was my identity. I'm the smartest kid in the class. Suddenly, I find myself in a class with 30 other genius kids who also define themselves as being the smartest kid in the class. Now, you throw 30 10-year-old kids into a class like this, and you get a gladiatorial arena. Not with fists, but with words. We were merciless. It was like the cruelest place I've ever seen in my life was this class. Sometimes, you know, I read in history books about wars and terrible things that are happening, so it's worse. But like from personal experience, this was kind of the worst thing that I saw was these 30 10-year-old kids tearing each other to pieces, trying to prove them I'm smarter than you. It was also hell for the teachers because our kind of contest was who could find the mistakes the teachers make and humiliate the teachers. This was like, you're a king of the class for a day if you manage to humiliate and most of the time we just humiliated each other. Like, you know, the teacher asks something and somebody gives an answer and everybody jumps and says, this is not true. And so it went on for years. And the whole rationale of this class was to develop the intellect of these kids. So nobody invested anything in developing our social skills, in developing our emotional skills, or in developing our physical skills, our bodily skills. And it was a very, I now can joke about it, but it was a very painful experience. You know, after being for 10 years in this environment, as teenager, we came out with quite developed intellects, but with horrible social skills, which made, I know some of the people who were in that class, and they still carry deep scars, injuries from that time. And this taught me in the most kind of personal and visceral way that you cannot define a person or build a person based only on intellectual skills. There are much more important things, that ultimately humanity is about feelings and not about thoughts. Maybe if I have more time, I'll say something also about, I said something personal, now let's kind of open it to the grand vision of human evolution. You know, originally, we humans, our ancestors at least, were worms crawling on the ground or in the mud. A very simple life form. It's just a tube with two openings, a mouth to take in food, and another opening to expel all the waste from the body. There was no brain. There were already nerve cells, neurons, but there was no brain. The center of command of this ancient worm was in the stomach, where the food went. Now, over millions of years, in order to get food and also warn about danger, so more nerve cells developed around the mouth in order to taste the food and smell the food and see the food and hear the food. And this became the brain. And this is still our basic structure today. We are basically a worm. It's just, you know, look at yourself. It's just this long twisting tube with a few things attached to it. But it's a worm, and the brain is still near the mouth. But the big question is, maybe the center of control is still where it always was, in the stomach, not in the brain. And it's a big question in brain science, because maybe not the stomach, but the spinal cord is an integral part of the brain. And there are good reasons to think that, yes, you have all these neurons here that get all the attention, but ultimately the real center of command of the human being is still here.
Well, actually, I know exactly what you're talking about, but Professor Harari, as one of the smartest guys around the world, saying that intelligence is not that important. It's really interesting. Okay, go on, Professor.
Yeah, actually, you know, always there's kind of show off to say that I'm very smart, but it's not so important. But actually, you know, I know that the students here on set of this hall, the Peking University students who have passed a very selective examination to go to this campus, and actually you during date back to your childhood, you are the smartest students in your class, but once you step into this campus, even though you're just somehow around average. And this is a very, you know, this is very tough process of mind change, especially in the first year, first semester. You must accept that I'm just around average. And, you know, most of your teacher think like you just so, you're not so smart. And all the way you adopted to demonstrate that you're smart is totally nonsense. So this is largely the things that lead us to a very important point to say that the things that make us human is about our deficiency, or the things that is not so concerned with intelligence. Because the things is just, for me, it's just like this. When we say that we are trying to controlling certain things that has intelligence that supports us, we still has a very important reasoning mode that comes from instrumental reasoning. we try to regard this as a tool, but not as a subjector. And if you regard this as a tool, then actually you will get into the trap of modernity. The trap of modernity is a continuous pursuit of efficiency. You do things quicker, and you face up to different kinds of competitions. And you have competitions with human beings, other companies, other countries, other nations, all those things. It's about competition. And now we have a new competition. With what? With AI. With new and species that is totally has intelligence that supports us. This is the real things that stir and get all us into a panic. And this kind of worry actually lead to a historical reflections. Because what? The anxiety that long for thousands of years always come from the same things. The uncertainty of future. And how we can take action responsible to respond the change that's happening. So to speak, for me, that is, the things is not just about technology. The things is about the deep understanding of a deficiency of human beings. And we should, with full recognition of our limitation, then to take a cautious steps towards the future. And to say, just as the motive of today's discussion, understanding is an antidote. You must firstly to do certain in-depth reflection before you take any action. But now we are too rush in action, and we too rush into a new form of competition. And this is largely what I called consequence of modernity. So we actually not face up to the so-called competition with AI, but we actually run into a competition with ourselves.
But I'm not sure I would put all the blame just on modernity, because we see things like that also in ancient times. I know very little about Taoism, so I would be happy to hear from you about it. But at least in the West, you can trace these things back thousands of years. Especially you talked about the fear that humans have of losing control, of not knowing. And this fear often propels people to look for something infallible. Mm-hmm. Like the fantasy of super intelligence didn't begin today or a few decades ago. The fantasy of super intelligence, at least in the West, goes back thousands of years when humans yearned to find some super intelligent savior, Messiah, God, that knows everything, that never makes mistake, and that we can rely on him because we can't rely on ourselves. And this fantasy, the first artifact that it produced, and which is still one of the most important artifacts in the world, is the Holy Book. Again, I don't know what is the status of Taoist texts that you're studying. I'll be very happy to hear in a moment from you. But in religions like Judaism and Christianity, ultimate authority is invested not in any human being, like a priest or a rabbi or something. Ultimate authority is invested in an artifact, a text, which is supposed to be super intelligent, never makes a mistake. Now, of course, until today, there was always one very big problem with texts like the Bible. They can't talk. They can't answer questions. So here I am, believing that this text is perfect intelligence, never makes any mistake, but I have trouble understanding the words. It's not written very well. There are too many meanings to the same sentence. I'm not sure which meaning is the correct one. Or maybe this text was written 3,000 years ago when people were farmers. Now I have like a modern business. I'm not sure how to apply the lessons of this text to the new reality. So what do? I ask the text, it doesn't answer. So I need a human to interpret the text for me. And then a class of humans emerge which are experts in interpreting the text, and they become the real authority in society. These are the rabbis and the priests. Now, something extremely interesting is happening right now in the world, at least of these religions, that suddenly the text can talk. Because you can give an AI to read the Bible and all the other religious texts. I mean, over thousands of years, if I take the case of Judaism, rabbis didn't just read the Bible. They wrote thousands and thousands of commentaries on the Bible and commentaries on the commentaries and commentaries on the commentaries on the commentaries, which all became sacred. And your position as a rabbi, you're a big rabbi if you know more texts, and you're a little rabbi if you know only a few. No rabbi was able to read and remember all the texts. Impossible for a human. But AI can. For the first time in the history of Judaism, there is something on earth that can read all the texts of Judaism, everything written by every rabbi in Poland or Yemen like 800 years ago. It read everything. It remembers every single word. It can find connections and patterns in the holy texts that no rabbi can. Will it become the new authority in Judaism? Now, if you have a question and the AI says, oh, this is the answer, it can give you like pages and pages of proof from holy books. Now, if a human rabbi says, don't listen to this AI, it's a soulless machine, the problem, at least in Judaism, is that the authority is invested in the text, not in the human. So if an AI finds arguments in the text, the rabbis cannot just dismiss because it's the argument, because the text has authority. Now the word speaks. AI has mastered language. So it's interesting. This is kind of my perspective as a historian on all this. How it's not just modernity, it's the whole of human history which is feeding into this AI revolution with very unexpected consequences, maybe. The same thing is happening in the legal system, which also a very authoritative text that until today we needed lawyers to interpret the text. Now the text can speak for itself. It's the same thing in the financial system. Until today we needed bankers and financiers to interpret the money, the financial texts. Now they can interpret themselves. So maybe AIs take over the financial systems and the religions and the legal system. So this is just kind of a thought to share. And I would be very happy to hear how it is in Taoism and whether you think that you'll have an AI Taoist master anytime soon.
No, actually, the case was totally different in Taoism. Because, I'm just not trying to blame everything to the modernity. But the thing is just like this, modernity comes from the Western tradition. Exactly, the modernity is the offspring of the whole tradition. But in China, it's totally different. Because Taoism is a too complex systematic sort. So let me just start with a very simple sentence, the very opening sentence of the Tao Te Ching, 道可道非常道, which means the things that you spoke out is not the constant things. Which means, for me, there is a very interesting definition of authority. You just mentioned of authority, which is always correct. And for us Chinese people, along with the Taoist intellectual tradition, we actually have the two pre-assumptions. The first thing is, as common human beings, we have very clear limitation of our rationality. We just cannot say we can control or grasp the ultimate truth of the cosmos, of the whole thing. And this is because what? Because we are human beings. And then, is there any authority that we can rely on that seems always correct? Yeah, we have certain kinds of memory of that things. Sagehood. There is golden age, governed by the sages, and the sages know the exact internal mechanism of the so-called cosmos. But the thing is just like this. Things change for Taoists. Everything changes, everything floating. And you just cannot say there is one set regulations and rules who can run all the way of the history of human beings. So the thing is that you must depend on the original text, but you just cannot just rely on it. You read into it and you get something back, and then you have a try of what you learned from it. And this does not mean you have the always correct regulations and rules that behind you. So to speak, the most important thing is that for Chinese people, especially for Taoists, we must keep open-minded towards the change, towards the ultimate rules of the cosmos, which we could say this: the cosmos is an eternal Sphinx riddle for Chinese people, especially for Taoists. So in this way, can we say that modernity as a product of Western tradition actually have a shortage to say that there is absolute rules, absolute regulations, and absolute or universal mechanism that can dominate everything that in our eyesight. But for Chinese or traditional Chinese thought, there is no such things. The universal correctness, the ultimate truth, there's nothing of it. Because you just look at the cosmos, everything changes. There is a totality of the cosmos, but there is no so-called ultimate and universal things that you can grasp and you can get. And this is why I just mentioned why Chinese people always keep humble to the change. And we always try to do things in a detour of learning and practicing. We're learning something and we put it in practice, and we got reflections, and we back to the text again, and then we take action according to my learning or learning from the text. So this is largely very Chinese style. And this is why I called Chinese style actually very different from the Western counterpart. And this is why we could find certain therapy of the problem of modernity that we can draw from the Oriental sources, Oriental thought. So this is largely why we should do certain expansion of our intellectual views through mutual learning and mutual understanding, I think.
And similarly, in Buddhism, there is also a lot of similar arguments to what you just mentioned from Taoism, that we need to acknowledge the limitations of humanity. There are no absolute truths that you can hold on to. Everything is empty. And you need to rely on practice and not just on some text that says something. And then they memorize these texts again and again and again. And you go to monasteries and you see even monks that their main practice is memorizing texts. And the authority in the religion becomes the authority of the experts on the texts. And the texts say, don't rely on texts. And this is what the experts on texts will say to you. And, you know, there is a very famous Buddhist story about a monk who meditated in a forest, and there was a parrot living near where the monk was meditating. And the monk wanted to protect the parrot from danger. So the monk told the parrot, parrot, be careful. In this part of the woods, there is a hunter that comes every now and then. The hunter will spread grains on the ground. You'll see the grains, you'll get attracted to the grains. When you go for the grains, he hid a net, and the net he'll spring the net, he will capture you. So parrot, be careful, a hunter will come. And the parrot, the monk kept repeating this warning, parrot, be careful, a hunter will come. And the parrot, as a parrot, learned this warning. And the parrot would sit there on the tree and just repeat all day, parrot, be careful, a hunter will come. Parrot, be careful, a hunter will come. And one day, a hunter came. And the hunter spread the grains. And the parrot got attracted to the grains and went to eat the grains. And the hunter sprang the trap, and the parrot was captured. And all through that process, and even when the hunter was holding the parrot in the hand, going to kill him, the parrot kept saying, parrot, be careful, a hunter will come.
You mentioned a very interesting things is about what? For me, the things is just like this. I think the fundamental part of just you mentioned, the gap between theory and practice, is about what? It's about our basic need as human beings. I think that our fundamental need is the need for order. The order, the understanding of the outside world. And this kind of understanding actually lead us to set up our intellectual man side somehow. But, when you run into a real life, you must somehow compromise with your immediate demand. And this compromise actually be part of your daily life. And you just cannot say, because there is a gap between theory and practice, to say that there is no use for theoretical understanding of the whole things. But what I try to say is that the foundation of order is we are longing for meaning. We must know what we are doing. You just say that we do some things. We must have our intention, and where come this so-called intention? I say we have a systematic understanding of what is meaning, and this meaning actually on the basis of order, the acknowledgement of the order, and this order actually lead to so-called knowledge. This logic lineage actually lead to my very simple conclusion to say this matter of the gap between the theory and the so-called practice. We should still respect the capacity of reflection and the theoretical construction. Because what? Because there is a balance between these two. And you must go back to theoretical reflections to keep you somehow distance from the wrong, misleading actions. So people is human beings so complex. We just cannot say we have one extreme. Though just as I mentioned, for Chinese philosophers, the most important thing is what? Is balance between extremes. But not to say, okay, there is a gap, so we must have a certain kind of solution for it.
But what do we do in the present moment in history when, for thousands of years, philosophers could have debates like this? And it was important to some extent, but it was not all that important because the world went on. Humans created various orders, and the orders collapsed, and they created a new order, and the new order was maintained for some time, and it collapsed. And this is how it went for thousands of years. And at least my fear is that we have reached the end of the road, and that whatever wisdom we have accumulated from thousands of years of philosophy and from thousands of years of history, it needs to manifest now, or it's too late. That like all the big questions of philosophy are now practical questions. we have, I don't know how many years. Some say 5 years, some say 10 years, some say 15 years before what the experts called AGI, artificial general intelligence. Not this little AI that you have on your smartphones, the DeepSeek or the ChatGPT, but the artificial general intelligence, which will be more intelligent than humans, not in a specific field, but in all fields. And once this happens, the ball is out of our hands. It's like we are having this discussion, and astronomers tell us that they spotted a fleet of spaceships coming from some other solar system. According to the calculations of the astronomers, these aliens will land on the planet in between 5 and 15 years. We don't know much about them. Maybe they're nice. Who knows? Maybe they'll help us solve cancer and overcome climate change, and maybe not. But we have 5 to 15 years to think what we are doing. And this is the time that I think all the wisdom traditions of humanity, again, developed over thousands of years, what do they tell us? What do they tell us about this specific moment in history, which is, I think, different from previous moments, because the process of change, of course, things will continue to change, but maybe not for humanity. Maybe this is kind of the last station for humanity.
Just one word. You can close the whole discussion. Actually, I think that for me, I'm more optimistic than you. For me, that advantage of humanity is just because of its deficiency. You know, just because we are not perfect. And you can imagine certain perfect things, but I do not think that we could just be replaced with the civilization of human beings. Will be replaced by certain super intelligence. Because what? Because we have emotions. But I just cannot imagine how silicon-based life have imagined, have desire, have intention to just to remove us, to set up a kind of governance on human beings. Because what? Because we have desires, because we are somehow has a very strong sense of shortage, strong sense of deficiency. So this is largely the only things that, in my mind, that might be more optimistic than you.
I'm not sure how much time we have, but I don't know whether AIs or AGIs will ever have consciousness, will ever have feelings. I think this is the biggest question of all, but I don't think that you need feelings in order to have goals and to act in the world as an independent agent. AIs, you give them a goal, or they develop a goal, then they do things to reach the goal without any emotions or desires. If you have a self-driving vehicle, you can give the vehicle the goal, get me as fast as possible to the train station, and the self-driving vehicle on the way would run over people. Because I gave it the goal, get there as fast as possible, and forgot to tell it, but don't kill anybody on the way. So, and similar, we have so many examples. That the most famous example is what happened on social media. That social media companies gave the AIs, the very primitive AIs that run social media, the goal of increasing user engagement, make people spend more time on the platform, and the algorithms began to spread hate and fear online and to destabilize societies all over the world, because they discovered that the easiest way to increase engagement is with fear and hatred and greed. So they don't have any desires, they don't have any emotions, but they can have a goal, and then they can do a lot of things on the way to that goal. And that, I think, is the danger for us. And the fact that we have emotions and feelings means that we can suffer a lot. I mean, I think that ultimately the definition of consciousness is the capacity to suffer and to be liberated from suffering. But this is no protection. Cows can suffer and we didn't treat them very well, other animals can suffer. And it's not necessarily even that we are evil. A lot of animals we have destroyed without even thinking about it. So the cows, we exploit them for meat and milk and so forth. But so many species have gone extinct in just the last few years by humans destroying their habitats, like they live in some forest, and the humans come and cut the forest and build something. And the humans are not even aware that they are doing something bad to these. There is no evil intention. It's just you don't see them. So some super intelligence may have whatever goal it could be, and it's not evil. It doesn't even have any emotions. It's just on the way to the goal, it runs over us.
Great. I think we are about to run out of time, but I'm sure that Professor Cheng likes to share some comments on. You're fine? Okay. So before we end, let's invite Professor Harari to give a close remark.
For me, it was an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. And this has been one of the most inspiring discussions I've had recently. So thank you for that. The reason I do these talks and that I wrote the book is because I really think that humanity is about to make maybe the most important decisions in our history. And at present, there are very few people in very few countries that understand what is happening and that take part in the conversation. Lots of people now have heard about AI, but most people don't have a deep enough understanding of the AI revolution to know what is at stake and to feel competent to take part in the discussion. So I can't tell people what would be the solutions or what policies to adopt. My understanding is also very limited. My goal is to give many more people in many more countries a basic understanding of what is the AI revolution, what is at stake, so that millions of people in numerous countries will feel motivated and competent to join the conversation, so that we can hear more opinions, more interests, more worldviews, and thereby hopefully reach a better decision. At present, the people who really understand and take the decisions, they are not even elected representatives of anybody. They are mostly these leaders of the big AI companies. And this is dangerous for humanity. So that's my motivation, and I hope that you will feel motivated and competent to take part in the conversation, because it's the conversation about your future also, about everybody's future. My other remark is that I noticed that there are several people here that read my books, that maybe are my fans, and I know from previous, I have historical knowledge, so I know what happens at the end of the event, that lots of people come and they want to sign books and take selfies and so forth, and unfortunately I don't have the time to do it because I have to rush to another event. So I would leave you with something better than my signature and better than my picture, which is really part of me. It's my atoms. Just as a final thought for reflection and about the interconnectedness of everything, we have sat you together in this beautiful hall for an hour and a half, breathing all the time, and the air mixes our breath together. So a lot of the atoms that were inside my body an hour and a half ago are now in your body. And a lot of the atoms that an hour and a half ago were in your body are now in my body. So in this way, we have shared something even more important than a signature or a picture. Thank you.
Thank you very much.